And so, as we were telling you, we do have confirmation at this hour that the president has signed the tariff orders, and we are getting some more details about what's in them. David, I don't know if you have it or if Katie has it. I don't know who wants to jump in here.
I've got the White House fact sheet here. If Katie has more, she can jump into this. I'm going to read this. This is
I'll start
coming
with you,
up.
and then Katie, you can jump in too.
Can I just caution one thing first? Is this the thing that I sent to Hill News because it's from a news organization? I did not get it directly from the White House. It's from a very is it from the White House directly?
This is from the White House, the fact sheet, it says, Right.
Okay, so but I just want to, go ahead.
Why don't we just start with the alerts, and Katie, you have a look and see what you can see. The White House says that retaliation clause calls for further action, likely increased tariffs if needed. It confirms what we've been reporting, that there will be a 25% tariff on Canadian exports and exports from Mexico, that will go into place on Tuesday. David, do you want to pick up there?
Yeah, the fact sheet that has moved on the wires from either the Associated Press or Reuters, it says, fact sheet, President Donald J. Trump imposes tariffs on imports from Canada, Mexico, and China, addressing an emergency situation. The extraordinary threat posed by illegal aliens and drugs, including deadly fentanyl, constitutes a national emergency under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Right. So that is the instrument that is being used, that has been discussed throughout the afternoon. Until the crisis is alleviated, President Trump is implementing a 25% additional tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico and a 10% additional tariff on imports from China. Energy resources from Canada will have a lower 10% tariff. No energy carve-out for Mexico. President Trump is taking bold action to hold Mexico, Canada, and China accountable to their promises of halting illegal immigration and stopping poisonous fentanyl and other drugs from flowing into our country. The orders make clear that the flow of contraband drugs like fentanyl to the United States through illicit distribution networks has created a national emergency, including a public health crisis. Chinese officials have failed to take action necessary to stem the flow of precursor chemicals to known criminal cartels and shut down money laundering by transnational criminal organizations. In addition, the Mexican drug trafficking organizations have an intolerable alliance with the government of Mexico. The government of Mexico has afforded safe havens for the cartels to engage in the manufacturing and transportation of dangerous narcotics, which collectively have led to the overdose deaths of hundreds of thousands of American victims. This alliance endangers the national security of the United States, and we must eradicate the influence of these dangerous cartels. There is also a growing presence of Mexican cartels operating fentanyl and nitazene synthesis labs in Canada. A recent study recognized Canada's heightened domestic production of fentanyl and its growing footprint within international narcotics distribution.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there, I think, David, just because it is a long fact sheet, and I think that gives us a couple of points to jump off on in terms of what he is using and what he is pointing to. So he is, as we suggested, using this 1977 Economic Emergency Powers Act that allows you to point to a national emergency to impose tariffs immediately. The emergency in this case, he says, is the opioid crisis in the country, and he is pointing to Mexico, Canada, and China as the sources of that fentanyl. Katie, you're looking at this as well. Anything jump out to you there? And I'll come back to David so he can go through it as well.
Yeah, well, Donald Trump also includes a mention of trade deficits. So here we go. It's not just about fentanyl. It's also about trade deficits. So here's a key part here. While trade accounts for 67% of Canada's GDP, 73% of Mexico's GDP, and 37% of China's GDP, it only accounts for 24% of U.S. GDP. However, in 2023, the U.S. trade deficit in goods was the world's largest at over $1 trillion. Tariffs are a powerful, proven source of leverage for protecting the national interest. President Trump is using the tools at hand to take decisive action that puts American safety and our national security first. So what has been written down in this fact sheet is mentions the concerns about illegal drugs, but also a mention of the trade deficit there. And then he goes on to talk about, President Donald Trump is keeping his promise to stop the flood of illegal aliens and drugs, as the language is in this. Donald Trump has said that promised voters that he would shut the southern U.S. border to stop migrants from entering the country. And it says that voters have given him a mandate to do it. So This is all sort of all within the wheelhouse of the threats that Donald Trump has been making ever since he made his initial threat, and how the goalposts have kind of changed. Okay, so it's about...
He also says a little bit later, because we're all just going through this and trying to bring it to people. He also says the tariff will remain in effect until such time as drugs, in particular fentanyl, and all illegal aliens stop this invasion of our country. So that isn't really a timeline that we would understand. And they point to the president's success in using tariffs against Colombia when he was trying to send people that have been deported from the United States back to Colombia. He used tariffs to convince them to take those planes. David, you're reading a little bit more. Anything else you want to highlight there?
There is an alert here that the White House says there's a retaliation clause, calls for further action and likely increased tariffs. So this is what we were saying the warning was, is that if there is a retaliation from Canada or Mexico back to the United States on this, that there would be further retaliation and an increase in the tariffs from the United States. Now, this is what is informing the decisions and consensus that is being made now in the meeting of the first ministers that is happening. Kate McKenna has in our newsroom, has added to some of the reporting we had earlier that they're now looking at a full $150 billion retaliatory package right out of the gates on day one. The Canadian government is. They initially talked about between 25 and 40 billion is the range we're hearing, then another 110 to 125 that will come later. They're now talking about doing the total 150 billion right out of the gate in response to this. Because, Rosie, on its face, what this is this is an unprecedented, extraordinary trade action for an indefinite and arbitrary period of time, right, to deal with the fentanyl issue. Like, what is the metric here? What is the change? I mean, presumably, they want to see like a massive crackdown on suspected super labs and all kinds of drug raids, and their argument that somehow Canada has become like this massive source of fentanyl into the United States, even though the seizure numbers wouldn't suggest that. Yes, there are super labs that have been busted in Canada, but a lot of that drug stays in the country. So what is the data and the metric behind this? That is going to be a very difficult thing to figure out. And how do you satisfy this demand? How do you comply with this demand in this moment when the stakes are so high and things are so expensive? So the retaliation clause is there. The tariff on Canada revokes the de minimis waiver, which has to do with duty-free or purchases under a certain amount going across the border. And the White House is saying that the lowered Canadian tariff on energy is to minimize the rise in costs. So this is interesting in that the 25% is across the board to try to use economic force to force Canada to do something to satisfy the demands of the President of the United States. We all know that that is going to lead to an increase in costs inside the United States. But to blunt against the full effect of the costs, the White House is saying this is why the tariff on energy is lower. The threat, the warning had been from Canada that if the full 25% tariff had applied to the oil and gas imports into the United States to go to the refiners, that the price of a gallon of gasoline would go up by about 75 cents. This is to halt that, keep it down, and not pass it on to the pumps to American consumers. The counter argument that had been considered on this side of the border was, do you put a tax, an export tax, on the energy so that they don't get that discount anymore, that you do make them pay the full price of this action? That has been a source of real division at the First Minister's table, and some warnings on that because of the economic consequences here should Canada do that, given the role oil plays in the economy of Canada. And now with the retaliation clause on top of all of that, what the Prime Minister says when he finally emerges to respond to this, Rosie, is going to be very fascinating, because what a tightrope the government of Canada has to walk with a president like this taking actions like the ones we're now seeing.